You have seen this letter 3 times already in this series. In the opening, as a teaser. In Chapter 1, as a data point. In Chapter 3, as part of a pattern. Now you are going to see exactly how it happened. In March of 1975, Secretary of State Henry Kissinger was in the Middle East trying to negotiate a second withdrawal agreement between Israel and Egypt in the Sinai Peninsula. The negotiations collapsed. Israel refused the terms. Kissinger came home empty-handed. Ford was furious. On March 24, 1975, Ford announced what he called a reassessment of the United States' relationship with Israel. That single word, reassessment, meant something specific. Ford suspended delivery of new arms agreements. He slowed economic assistance. He was doing what every American president has the right to do with any country that receives American aid, using that aid as leverage to advance American foreign policy objectives. This is not controversial in any other diplomatic context. The United States conditions aid to countries around the world, routinely. It is the most basic tool of American foreign policy. Ford tried it with Israel. AIPAC mobilized immediately. The mechanics are worth understanding because they explain everything that came after. AIPAC did not need to convince 76 senators that Israel deserved unconditional support. That argument had been building for 30 years. Through the Cold War, through the 1973 Yom Kippur emergency airlift, through decades of bipartisan consensus that Israel was a strategic ally against Soviet influence in the Middle East. What AIPAC needed to do was convert that general sentiment into a specific public signed commitment in 3 weeks against the stated foreign policy position of the sitting president. They had already tested the infrastructure. In December 1974, 71 senators had signed a separate letter to Ford on a related issue, criticizing the United Nations treatment of Israel and the PLO question. That letter proved the network could be activated. The 71 signatures told AIPAC exactly who was reachable and who was not. 5 months later, when Ford announced the reassessment, AIPAC did not start from zero. They started from 71. The letter told the President of the United States to maintain both economic and military support for Israel. It told him not to use that aid as a diplomatic tool. It told him, in effect, to abandon his own reassessment. 76 senators signed it. 51 is enough to pass a law. 67 is enough to override a veto, the most powerful check Congress has on the presidency. AIPAC got 76. They didn't need a law. They didn't need a veto override. They needed Ford to see the number and understand what it meant. He saw it. He understood. Ford backed down. He did not make them vote. He did not challenge the letter. He did not attempt to use aid as leverage against Israel again. The reassessment was over. On the same day the letter was entered into the Congressional Record, Senator George McGovern took the Senate floor. McGovern had signed the letter. He was one of the 76. But he immediately distanced himself from what it implied. He told the Senate that his signature did not mean he approved of Israel occupying Arab territories. He called for Palestinian self-determination. He called for return of occupied lands. He signed the letter and then stood up in the official record to explain that he didn't really mean it. That is not a senator expressing conviction. That is a senator who signed because he had to, and then tried to put his actual position on the record before anyone mistook the signature for agreement. When you have to sign something and immediately explain publicly that you don't agree with it, that is political pressure. Not persuasion, not consensus. Pressure. 25 senators did not sign. They deserve attention, because in a body of 100, the ones who said no tell you as much as the ones who said yes. The non-signers fell into 2 broad groups. Southern Democrats who were skeptical of foreign aid commitments generally, men who would have resisted any large-scale foreign spending, not just aid to Israel, and conservative Republicans who objected to the principle of Congress overruling a president's foreign policy, not because they opposed Israel, but because they opposed the precedent. Senate Majority Leader Mike Mansfield did not sign. That is significant. The leader of the Senate chose not to put his name on a letter signed by 3/4 of his colleagues. Senator James Abourezk of South Dakota, the first Arab-American senator, did not sign. Senator Charles Percy of Illinois did not sign. AIPAC later helped defeat him in 1984. The 25 who said no were not punished uniformly. Most were already at the end of their careers, retiring, aging, or operating in states where AIPAC's donor network had limited reach. But the ones who were reachable, the ones in competitive states who could be made an example of, were noted. And when the time came, the example was made. The same day the letter was entered into the Congressional Record, Secretary Kissinger was overseas. A cable was sent to him, now declassified, informing him of the letter and its implications. The full diplomatic record from that week confirms what the letter already proved on its face. The reassessment was dead. The administration knew it immediately, not because they were out-argued on the merits, but because 76 senators had made the political cost of continuing unacceptable. The next day, Israel publicly thanked the 76 senators. That detail is worth sitting with. A foreign government publicly thanking American legislators for overruling their own president on the front page of the Jewish Telegraphic Agency the day after it happened. Ford was the last to try, and everyone who came after him knew what happened to the last president who tried. That letter did not just end the reassessment, it ended the possibility of reassessment. The 76 signatures were not just a message to Gerald Ford, they were a message to every president who would follow, a permanent demonstration that the lobby could mobilize more senators faster than any White House could counter. And the letter was only the headline, because the Congressional Record from May 22, 1975 contained more than just a letter. The 76-senator letter was the headline. Every newspaper in Washington covered it. Every foreign desk in every capital took note. Gerald Ford saw it and abandoned his reassessment. That letter, by any measure, was the most significant event in the Congressional Record on May 22, 1975. But it was not the only thing in the record that day. The Congressional Record is the official transcript of everything said and done on the floor of the United States Senate and House of Representatives. In 1975, there were no television cameras in Congress. C-SPAN would not exist for another 4 years. The Congressional Record was a printed document, deposited in government archives, available to researchers, and read by almost no one outside of Capitol Hill. Senators spoke freely, votes were recorded, appropriations were entered, and the full record sat in government filing systems for 50 years, public, accessible, and largely unexamined. What follows comes directly from that record. On the same day that 76 senators signed a letter defending Israel's right to unconditional American military and economic support, the Senate also quietly approved Senate Concurrent Resolution 15, a 2-year extension of the United States-Israel Agreement for Cooperation on Civil Uses of Atomic Energy. No floor debate, no speeches, no recorded opposition. In 1975, Israel's nuclear weapons program was an open secret. The CIA had assessed years earlier that Israel possessed nuclear weapons. The international community knew. The American intelligence community knew. Congress knew. And on the same day that 3/4 of the Senate publicly told the president he could not use aid as leverage, the Senate also extended a nuclear cooperation agreement with the country at the center of the dispute. No one covered it. No one debated it. It was entered into the record and moved on. Further in the same day's record, inside a bill called the Emergency Employment Appropriations Act, H.J. Res. 219, the Senate approved a set of spending provisions that had nothing to do with American employment. $40 million for the resettlement of Soviet Jews emigrating to Israel, inside an American unemployment relief bill. In the same bill, $10 million for Palestinian refugees, $40 million to move people to Israel, $10 million for the people displaced by Israel, a 4-to-1 ratio in the same piece of legislation, on the same day as the letter. No senator stood up to debate the ratio. No senator asked why an emergency jobs bill for unemployed Americans contained $40 million for Israeli population growth. No senator questioned why Palestinian refugees received 1/4 of what was allocated to move new residents into the country that created those refugees. The line items were entered into the record, and the Senate moved on. Adjusted for inflation, that $40 million is roughly $230 million today. hidden inside a bill designed to help unemployed Americans find work. This is the technique, not lobbying in the way most Americans understand it. A man in a suit making an argument to a senator in an office. This is structural. This is procedural. You take spending that would attract scrutiny if it stood alone, nuclear cooperation with a country building weapons, immigration funding for a foreign government's population strategy, and you bury it inside legislation that has nothing to do with it. An unemployment bill, an emergency spending package, a routine authorization. No separate vote, no separate debate, no journalist covering the unemployment bill is going to read the line items carefully enough to find $40 million for Israeli immigration policy. The spending is approved, the record is filed, and it sits in a government archive for half a century with nobody putting it on screen. May 22nd, 1975. One day in the United States Senate. A letter overruling the president on foreign policy, the most dramatic lobbying achievement in American history. A nuclear cooperation agreement extended without a word of debate. $40 million for Israeli immigration buried in an unemployment bill, and a 4-to-1 spending ratio that tells you everything about whose interests the United States Senate was serving that day, without a single senator having to say it out loud. None of this was classified. None of it was hidden in a vault. It was entered into the official public record of the United States Congress and deposited in government archives, where it has been available to anyone who wanted to look for the last 50 years. Nobody looked.